Hello and welcome to another edition of Stop Me If You've Heard This Before. This is a series of instructional videos that I've set up for my English 2 class. Today we're going to talk about characters in stories, specifically some short stories and how they pertain to those, although most characters in pretty much every story share these types of traits, and we'll talk about those as we go along. Just a real quick reminder for you, pause the video to write down notes or questions. I said earlier that I'd put a guided notes page up on Moodle. Look for that. You can write some notes down in there, or just type them into your phone, or write them down on your notebook and bring them with you to class tomorrow if you would, and we'll look at them then. Thank you. Characters. Here we go. Characters are defined by the qualities that make them think, feel, speak, and act in certain ways, and by what other characters think of them. This is true for every character in every piece of literature that you'll read. Most notably, there's 4 things that stand out about characters and that need to be present for a character to be well-rounded, interesting character like we talked about earlier today. Values is one of those things. What things are important to a character's life? What do we see them valuing in that story? What emotions or what feelings does a character go through over the course of the story? Those are other things that identify characters. The goals that a character has. What are his or her greatest hopes? What do they want to accomplish over the course of the story? What do we find them trying to get done? And similarly, what problems do they have to overcome in keeping them from reaching those goals? What problems exist that keep them from those goals? Think about these 4 things: values, feelings, goals, and problems, in terms of characters like these. Take a moment. Pick one of these 3. You read Fahrenheit 451 last year, most likely. You've seen or read of Katniss Everdeen, or both. Think about her in terms of values, feelings, goals, and problems. And then many of you have grown up with Homer. So think about those characters for a second, and you can pause me in order to do that. Characterization involves the various methods that an author uses to introduce us to or to develop a character. They can do that in a couple of different ways. The first way is to directly tell us about that character, specifically what that character values, what that character's problems are, what that character's personality is, or they can indirectly show us. So, in other words, the author will display those traits through character speaking or by their actions that they make. But an author won't come out directly and say what that character's personality or image is. We instead have to figure it out based on that dialogue or based on that character's actions. Here's an example. Would you read over this paragraph from the Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian? From Sherman Alexie here. Read over that paragraph and see if you can't find an example of indirect and an example of direct characterization. Right here, you'll note Mr. P is a weird-looking dude. That's the author directly telling us about a character trait for Mr. P. But if you look below there, he says the weirdest thing is he forgets to come to school. Let me repeat that. He forgets to come to school. That's showing us a little bit more than telling us how forgetful Mr. P is. I guess you could kind of still assume that, right? And if the author were to show Mr. P walking in 15 minutes late for first hour, right? Then we would get maybe a little bit better indication indirectly of this personality trait that Mr. P has, right? Of being forgetful or being late constantly. So direct characterization here, maybe a little bit more indirect here, in that we're showing instead of telling. Character types to take into consideration as we look at some characters this semester. A dynamic character is a character that's going to change over the course of the story. They'll develop, they'll figure out that problem, and they'll grow as a result of achieving that goal. Static characters are characters that are one-dimensional. They stay the same through the story. Generally, these characters are side characters. They're characters who help the protagonist, right, but don't necessarily change themselves. Or they're also characters who are in conflict with the main character, the protagonist. Static characters are often archetypes, meaning they're stereotypical characters, right, that appear over and over again. So you've got the jock character, you've got the ditzy blonde character, you've got the nerdy high school kid. Don't make any jokes about Mr. Dunn there. But those are stereotypical characters, right? They're archetypes. They don't really change over the course of a story. A couple more things. We talked protagonist earlier today. We talked antagonist earlier today. We didn't talk anti-hero, but that's a character that's really becoming more and more prevalent. Protagonist is the main character, the hero of the story. Antagonist is a character that's in conflict with or in opposition to the main character. Not necessarily a villain, but a lot of times we think of them that way. An anti-hero is a character who's an underdog or who is heroic in an atypical way. It's a character that we wouldn't necessarily think of or cheer for, but they are the main character. And so we kind of attach ourselves to them because they are the main character. Whether what they're doing is heroic in this typical sense or not, we tend to think of them as characters that we want to cheer for, despite the fact that they might not be such great characters. Okay? We'll get you a couple examples of these characters tomorrow. We'll pause there, bring some notes back with you tomorrow, as well as make sure you're pretty clear on indirect versus direct characterization. We'll talk about those more tomorrow. See you then.